Amazon is just an e-commerce company, right? Like 1,000 others. I mean, they probably have more influence to the product model than anybody else. If you don't have an experimentation culture, you're just not going to innovate. Just reality is you're not going to innovate. In the product model, in every one of the product companies that influence the product model, that role is not done by a scrum master. That role is done by the product leaders. It's really about moving from projects and output and dates to outcomes, products, outcomes, business results. Pilot teams are a really effective way for the organization to adopt change. We suggest starting with that assessment and then, based on the assessment, select a strategy, a transformation strategy. If you are outsourcing your engineers, you are dramatically reducing any chances of innovation. By the way, you're also going to go way slower and it's going to cost more.
Hello and welcome back, everyone. We are back into one of our Agile Insights conversations for the third time. We're hosting Marty Cagan. First of all, Marty, so big thank you to you that you're making yourself available to us. This little company here in Germany, we're very, very grateful to get the chance to talk to you, speak to you about your books. This interview was planned initially for, I think, March 6 or 7. Which was a week before the launch of your book. I have it here, and you can also see it in the background, Transformed, which you have not written, to my knowledge, by yourself alone, but also with the help of many of your SVPG partners. They are named on the book. I won't go through all the names here, but we've also had Christian Idioti in one of our interviews. He did a fantastic job bringing across a lot of energy. And today, as the book title is there, we want to talk about transformation. So we've talked about leadership, which is also one part of transformation, but today we only want to focus on the topic of transformation, given you've written this recent book. Now, as we discussed before we started the recording, Marty, I don't want to redo what many of the other great interviewers have done in talking to you about this book. We will actually link some of the interviews. My favorite one was with Lenny Rajitsky. It's part of his podcast on product in general, of course, also covering the product operating model. So today we're going to briefly look at the why to transform and how to think about or look at the product operating model. But we'll be spending the vast majority of our time looking at the what we need to do, right? What are concrete next steps? And I want to look, as we also have like very different types of clients, on the one hand, at like mid-sized companies around 1,000 people or a bit more, but also at very large companies that not always have the same environment in which many smaller companies, including startups and scale-ups, can work in. And I would really love to pick your brain on that. So thank you for being here with us today, Marty.
Thanks for inviting me back, Sohrab.
I would always invite you back. The question is how many times you want to follow my invitations. You're always welcome. So let's dive right in. I think we don't need to introduce you because the people that have been following our show, they know you really well. Now, you've written this book with specific intent. And my assumption is the intention behind that is that many people came to you, looked at what you've done with Inspired, looked at what you've done with Empowered, and said, yeah, we would love to use these things, but our organization doesn't allow us or doesn't give us the right environment to do it. And probably we need to change. We need to transform. Like one of those topics where many organizations also bring in consultants from the outside world. And my guess is at some point you're like, I'm sick and tired of seeing all of these transformations fail. So let's put a book out there where we lay out, I'm not going to say a master plan, but a set of patterns that helps organizations do that or increase their chances of success. Is that assumption correct on the why you wrote this book?
It is generally correct for sure. The other sort of thing going on, the internet is a funny place. There are all these voices, some amazing voices, some fantastic people, but also a lot of people that really don't know what they're talking about. And one of the things that really bothered me is for years there have been these voices out there just saying, oh, it's impossible. Don't even try. It's not even possible. Unless you're Netflix, unless you're Amazon, you can't do this. And, we've been doing this for 20 years and helping companies. So we knew that wasn't true, but we felt like, okay, we need to once and for all show people that, yes, it's very difficult, but it is absolutely possible. So we made some rules for ourselves. So, for example, none of the examples in the book, none of the case studies are from Silicon Valley companies. We wanted them to be all, because it's easier if you're born in that model. But if you're not, it's a lot harder. So that was a way really to answer, because there are always people who are, always people who would rather not try or think it's very difficult, don't have that agency to kind of believe they can do it. So we wanted to provide a counter narrative, say, look, and by the, in the book, it's all people's real names. People have already gone on to LinkedIn, and some of them have reached out and said, hey, you're in the same country I am. We saw what you did. Tell us more. That's, it's all real.
Yeah. No, I think it's really important, because when I look at many organizations, even leaders at the very top sometimes fall into what I refer to as the victim trap. Right? They believe, we can't do anything. I'm a victim here, right? The people that came before me, they messed this place up, and it is beyond me to fix this. Yeah. But then there are some people, and I refer to them as shapers. They go in and they're like, you mentioned they have agency, right? Shreyas Doshi talks about agency a lot, right? They have agency. They're like, yeah, I know it's a bit messy here, but what is it that I can do, right? What is the valid next step that we can take? And I think this is one of the beautiful things that you have covered in this book. Now, you mentioned, I think, that the vast majority of case studies, or maybe all of them, are not Silicon Valley based. If I remember correctly, you briefly cover also on Adobe, right? But absolutely, like the vast majority are non-Silicon Valley based.
That's right. Yeah. Adobe is an interesting one, because people don't realize, they assume they're an internet generation company, but they're a pre-internet company. They've been around a long time. So they're an old company that, started in printers, actually. So, that was amazing. That's a fun one too, because that was probably one of the most financially successful transformations in the world.
Yeah, with the business model change that they made, and I think the regulation or the constraints that you put for yourself is very valuable, because having worked in Germany almost all of my life, I always hear the doubts that people have, the concerns. Yeah, it works at founder-driven companies in the US. So when I work with organizations, I also try to, similar to you, bring up a lot of case studies from all over the world. One of my favorite case studies, it's not towards a product operating model, but in terms of like organizational change and how they set up the org, is Hire from China. Probably you're familiar with them, right? And when you show companies that the way of operating can be different, the independent from the cultural context that you're in, etc., you show that it's doable. You basically show them the black swan. I always refer to that. And then they're like, all right, now we believe, now we can approach this. Now you kick off the book with why to transform. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but for the people who have not taken the time yet to listen to some of your other interviews, what would be your 2 to 3 points in terms of why organizations, many, not all, need to transform?
Yeah. Well, I do think I would never suggest that every company in the world has to transform. I can tell you the main reasons that companies tell us that they believe they need to transform. And there are really 3 big reasons, and then a lot of minor ones. The first big reason is they feel like they have a competitive threat now they never had before. So, for example, in the financial services industry, they have finally taken seriously this whole technology-powered revolution, because there are now competitors out there that are taking away their customers. There's new companies like Stripe. There's digital banks. It's just all this disruption going on there. So many of the biggest financial institutions in the world have said, we now need to take this seriously. And that's really because of fear, right? Fear they'll lose their customers, they'll lose their revenue. There's another category of companies that view it much more opportunistically. Basically, their board says, look, if look at these other companies. They're valued 10 times what we are, 100 times what we are by the stock market. How come they're valued so high? Because the market believes they know how to innovate, and they don't believe we know how to innovate. If we can just show the world, show the Wall Street that we can consistently innovate, we will get valued this much. And, now we're talking about they'll make a lot more money. Their stock will be worth a lot more. That's a big motivator for a whole class of companies. Some of the ones in the book, this was just investors realizing they should be getting much more out of the company. And then the third is, and these are not mutually exclusive. There can be some of each of these going on, of course. But the third are these big companies where the CFO just says, we spend so much money on technology and we get so little in return. And they are just frustrated it's not like they just discovered this. They've been saying this for a long time, but now they're starting to hear, they're starting to read, or, they see articles in Harvard Business Review and they start realizing, wow, maybe there are other ways to do this. Maybe it's not that we're destined to only get, a return on 10% of the things we fund. And so and their motivation, of course, is to get more for their technology euros. So that's the third big reason we see. And so it just depends on where they're coming from. In some places, their employees are very unhappy.
Yeah.
And so they are looking at it from how could they make a better work environment. That's, I wish there were more companies in that category, but that is one of the ones factors we sometimes hear.
Yeah, I think the war for talent is a not so negligible factor here as well. So, yeah. I mean, right now it's shifting a bit into being primarily an employer market,
right?
But
it goes up and down.
Exactly, it goes up and down. If you don't prepare for it becoming again an employee market and become a great place to work, where people believe they can build things autonomously, etc., then you won't succeed in those cycles as well. So you mentioned 4 factors, and I believe in terms of covering why transformation could be relevant for organizations, that's plenty, right? And I believe many organizations, independent from the industry that they're in, when they hear these things, they're like, yep, this works for us, this works for us, this works for us. So they see or they realize it is needed for them, probably. Now, the question is, we understand we want to transform, but we don't know where to, right? What is this product operating model? Right. You mentioned it's a conceptual model. You specifically say it's not something like SAFe, right? Scaled Agile Framework, right? It's more a collection of patterns that you have seen at many of the most successful organizations, if I'm not mistaken. And those organizations, be it Apple, Amazon, Google, whatever, they operate all in many different ways, but they still follow the same patterns, the same principles. Is that correct?
It is. And you can really talk about this at a lot of levels. You're kind of diving down to the core level, the principles. A lot of times it's useful for people at the highest level. It's really about moving from projects and output and dates to outcomes. Products, outcomes, business results. So that's the high level, what it really means. You're moving from output, shipping features, to outcomes, achieving business results. But what does that really mean? If you double click on that, there's any number of ways you could think about this, but the way we explain it, sort of high level taxonomy, is that when you transform, it means looking hard at how do you decide what to invest in? How do you decide which problems you should solve? How do you solve those problems? And then how do you build and deploy your solutions? Those are the 3 big areas that we define, we would define. That's what it means to work in the product model, is that you adopted the principles for those 3 areas. The first is really product strategy, which is how do you decide what to invest in, the most important opportunities. The second is Product discovery, how do you actually solve problems quickly, time to market, time to money. And then the third is product delivery. How do you build, test, and deploy your solutions? So that's kind of how we think about it at the high level. And then to your point, for those three things, there are a set of principles that are important. So for example, if you don't have an experimentation culture, you're just not going to innovate. Just reality is you're not going to innovate. And it's remarkable how many companies, they all say they want to innovate, but they don't embrace experimentation.
Exactly.
So they want the wins, but they don't want the work to do that. So there are some things. Now, of course, there's many different ways to do experiments. We do experiments different if it's a regulated industry, if it's in healthcare versus if you're doing a consumer. But we all do experimentation if we're trying to innovate. And this whole philosophical difference about, well, what's more important? Hitting a date or achieving a business result. In the product model, hitting dates are important, but not as important as achieving the business result, which is right at the core of this difference. So those are the kinds of principles. In the book, we lay out 20 principles that we find in all the best product companies. Like you said, they might do them differently. They might approach the techniques are different that they use because they should. Like Apple is a device company primarily, and Stripe is a software company primarily. So they might attack it differently, but they're still doing those principles. They're embracing those principles.
Yeah, they're following them. They're taking those principles and putting them into practice, but the way they put them into practice takes different shapes and forms.
That's right.
Now, what I liked, so I attended your workshop last year, July, in London. I think that was the very first transformed workshop.
Right.
And you stated the same three questions back then, but you stated them in a different order. You started with the delivery, how do we build? Then you went to discovery, how do we solve problems? And then you went to strategy, how to decide which problems to solve. So back then I was thinking, if I'm talking to a CEO of an organization, probably changing the order, the way you just did it, would work better. Now, this probably is already a segue towards like how to transform and how to help an organization embark on this journey. What has been your experience? Do you just phrase it from time to time differently? Do you base it on the audience that you're addressing? Have you now consistently switched to starting with a strategy piece and then going to delivery?
So it's a fair question. And I will tell you, the book has it in the version that you cited, how to build, how to discover. And there's a reason for that. And I'll just say the reason is because usually, but first of all, those three things can be done in whatever order. They're not dependent. However, it is very common to start with the build and then go to the discovery and then go to the strategy. And in fact, there's a logic to that. There's some really nice reasons, which we can talk about, get sort of into the politics of an organization. On the other hand, like you observed, logically, when you sit down with a senior leader, the first question they have is, how do we decide what to invest in, right? That's the higher level question. So we start it's not like we formalized this. I often, when I'm speaking to the leadership team, I do it in that order. I say, look, at the highest level, you have to decide what you're going to invest in. And every company does some kind of quarterly planning thing. But what is the real point of all that exercise? To decide the most important areas to invest in. Most important problems to solve. And then once you've got those problems, you need to solve those problems. And then once you've solved them, you need to deliver those solutions to your customers. So you can explain them in any order, but that's really what's going on. How you sort of talk about it and how you implement it might be in a different order.
Exactly. Now let's go into the implementation. You said when it's about implementation, most organizations would be better served starting with the delivery piece, right? How do we build solutions? Did I get that right?
Yeah, it's not so much better served. Partly it's historical. So you of course know this, but the how you build, that's what Agile was supposed to really do for companies, is fix that. And 20 years ago, that is what most people got out of Agile. Today, a lot of companies don't get that out of Agile. And it's frustrating because I have to explain, because, most CEOs say, what are you talking about? We've invested for 10 years in Agile. We have all these coaches, but I'm like, but you're still not releasing, you still are not doing the basics of Agile. And of course, they're like, well, that's what's wrong with this? What happened? And I'm like, well, you sort of, you got to be careful about who you get to help you. Agile's principles are quite good, and you'll see the consistency in the principles in the book. But process people have other agendas sometimes. And so they can focus on different things. So today, the point is they might be really doing Agile or they might not. It's not enough when they just tell you they're Agile. Well, we have to look deeper. In particular, we have to look, are they doing small, frequent, uncoupled releases? If they're not doing that at least once every 2 weeks, it's very unfortunate, but they really haven't done anything.
Yeah. Are they not only releasing, but also collecting the customer's feedback on that?
Yeah.
And then including that into their next planning phase. Well, all of those things are important factors. Now, for me, Marty, and I fully agree with your assessment, and it frustrates me so much, having been in this industry myself for 12, 15, I don't know how many years, that a lot of organizations say they're doing XYZ or just use the term Agile. But if you go and just spend half a day or a day looking at how they do things, the craftsmanship is not there. Now, you've been around a few years longer than I, in general, also in the industry. Have you seen this with other approaches as well? That the craftsmanship just wasn't there, although a lot of people pretended? Or is this an Agile specific thing? Because my first profession, medicine, if you don't do the craftsmanship right, you don't get very far, right? But when I look at organizations, I see so much mess where I'm like, who did that? Yeah. So what's your perspective?
No, it's true. I don't usually frame it as far as in terms of craftsmanship, but that's not wrong. That's not a bad metaphor, because there is the craft. In fact, one of the things their Agile coaches are supposed to be helping teams develop the craft.
Exactly.
They are supposed to do that. But if you look, you know this very well, many Agile coaches have never actually learned the craft. They have never learned it. Now, they've learned the processes. They could tell you the difference between Scrum and Kanban and SAFe, but they can't tell you how to do continuous delivery because they've never actually done the craft. They don't know about telemetry, monitoring, instrumentation, outcome for analytics. They don't know about those things because they've never done it. That's why actually in the book, we talk about, Agile coaching doesn't have enough meaning today. We use the term delivery coach. A delivery coach, and my opinion is every Agile coach should be a delivery coach. We just know that's not the reality today. And, buyer beware. It is on the client. It is on the company trying to transform that they make sure that their Agile coaches are competent delivery coaches. If they're not at least a delivery coach, they need to get a real delivery coach. And I don't know, is there some value in an Agile coach that can't actually help teach you the craft? I don't know, maybe a little, but I sure wouldn't want to defend that to the CEO.
Yeah, no, I would actually say there's no value. So when I work with teams, and I've trained, I don't know how many thousands of people to become Scrum Masters, I always say to them, you also have a product, and your product is the team. And you need to take this team and make it a high performance team. And the definition of high performance team is that your team is capable of delivering a great product in a constantly evolving, better way. If you're not doing that, you're not doing your job. So, I think if they can't be a delivery coach, the term that you use, they're completely worthless.
So it's worth probably double clicking on this, because like you and I were just talking about, the delivery coach is really about the craft. How do you build, test, deploy consistent, reliable outcome software? How do you do that?
Software or hardware, depending on what your product is.
That's right. Yeah. That's the craft. You also introduced another dimension, which is how, if your product is the team, we need to make sure that team has got the skills they need to practice that craft, and we need to make sure they know how to collaborate.
Exactly.
I would argue that that's not the job of a scrum master. I would argue that that's theoretically the job of a scrum master. 90% of the scrum masters I've met have absolutely no ability to do that.
I agree with that.
And the real job, and this is in the book, in the product model, in every one of the product companies that influence the product model, that role is not done by a scrum master. That role is done by the product leaders. The product leaders. And those product leaders, which are really the managers of engineers, the managers of designers, and the managers of product managers. Those are the people that actually have the skills. Those are the ones that are accountable for this. Those are the ones we say your product is your team. Those are the ones that actually, the whole idea is they get promoted because they have demonstrated they have those skills. And can a scrum master do that in theory? What a rare scrum master. First of all, they almost certainly don't have this cross-functional range of skills. So maybe they have the engineering skills, but they almost certainly don't have the design skills. They almost certainly don't have the product management skills. So I would argue that's part of the problem. We need to stop thinking of scrum masters in this role. And we need to start holding accountable the product leaders.
No, I absolutely agree. So what I mentioned is when the scrum master when their product is the team, I don't mean that they teach every single member of that cross-functional team the craftsmanship of their particular craft. That's impossible, right? There might be like a very rare person that can do engineering, design, test, all of that, but most people can't. What I mean is the collaboration piece. How do you come together? How do you navigate conflict? How do you make decisions as a collective, right? Practicing things like disagree and commit. And a lot of the other things, those would be things that I would expect every Scrum Master, Agile coach to bring in to their team. Okay, how do you visualize workflow, right? And how do you identify bottlenecks in order to remove those things? So those would be my expectations. Go ahead.
That's what I meant when I said there is a little value to a scrum master that doesn't actually know the craft, but does recognize like, okay, we have a conflict here. We can help with that. Yeah. That said, I still think the right person to really help people learn to collaborate is your manager.
Yes.
Because 100%. they are literally, that is their job. That is their job. Because remember, the Scrum Master is also tracking down all kinds of dependencies and impediments. And so they kind of have another obligation too. So anyway, to me, it's not about the Scrum Masters. It's really about the product leaders doing their job. I would argue the book argues there are 4 critical competencies to be able to do the product model. Real product managers, real designers, real tech leads, but also, and I would argue the most important of them, the product leaders, because it is the product leaders that really make these teams work.
Yeah. And I remember during our other conversations and when we met in London, you mentioned several times when people ask you this question, so how do we scale product development? And my recollection, please correct me if I'm wrong, is you say you don't scale through process, you scale through people.
Right.
And this is why in Empowered, your other book, if people haven't read it, read it. You so much focus on why leadership or the people that are in leadership positions, the product leaders that you mentioned, need to spend a significant amount of their time developing people, because you ultimately scale through those people. And I think you picked up a lot of that philosophy, if I'm not mistaken, from the late Andy Grove, right? Who in his book, High Output Management, dedicates a whole chapter to the question of why training is the boss's job. Is that correct to some extent?
That is, and as well as the other person is Bill Campbell, who was a contemporary of Andy Grove, and they both were big believers in empowered teams and coaching your people. And yes, $1 Trillion Coach was actually about Bill Campbell, and High Output Management, of course, and I should mention Andy Grove was the person who invented OKRs for that reason of empowering teams.
Yeah, giving them problem to solve and not features to build. So after the segue we did around Scrum Masters or the distraction, let's go back to the question now. When we start, and you mentioned historically, many organizations started the transformation process looking at how do we actually build things, so the delivery piece. Now, we both agree that a lot of organizations, despite a lot of the investment that they've made, are not there yet. So they haven't set the foundation for releasing every other week, talking to their customers frequently, and so on and so forth. Now, if you look at those organizations, should they not even consider the other two questions before they get the delivery piece right? Or is it already worth solving the problem of how do we solve problems and how do we decide which problems to solve?
And I would argue that it is worth doing in parallel. And here's why. We want to do what we just talked about in delivery. We want to get, 10 years ago, it was release every other week. Today, it's continuous delivery. That's really the bar where you want to get to in order to truly take care of your customers. And what's really impressive is today, all the evidence that shows if you want both quality and speed, that's the key to that. But that said, unless you address changing how you solve problems, it's still garbage in, garbage out. Right? So product delivery will ship whatever's on the backlog. Now, hopefully it'll be more reliable and it'll get out faster. But if it's still not the right solution, you're not going to see improvements to outcomes. So, which is why we say what you want to focus on is get that foundation in place. And we haven't even brought up, but one of the things that makes the delivery part harder is tech debt. And so a lot of times it implies that you really have to get your act together on your infrastructure. And so there's some big work to be done on changing how you build, for sure. But at the same time, you want to change how you solve problems, because that way you won't be wasting your engineers. So those two, and then those are the two I would argue you really want to get real progress on quickly, because those two make a big difference. And then you can have an organization that can solve problems effectively and quickly. For our customers in ways, our customers love but work for our business. That still doesn't address the higher order question of, are we actually solving the most important problems? But the nice part is that third element, that can be your second wave. So, yeah. I am generalizing here, and there's a lot there's big companies, small companies, all kinds of different elements. But in general, I like to focus on getting how you build and how you solve problems working well first. Now, partly that's because it's all about establishing the trust with the executives in the company. It's very hard, and I would argue not even responsible, to go to your senior executives and say, let us decide the most important problems to solve. They're like, wait a minute, you haven't even shown that you could ship consistently. So why in the world would we do that? And that's fair. So I like to first get the organization solving problems well, product discovery, delivering solutions consistently, product delivery. And then you sort of earn the right to go to the leaders and say, and we think we can contribute at an even higher level now. And that lets you introduce a holistic product strategy. So what I am suggesting is that there's normally a game plan here around changing how you build, changing how you solve problems, get those underway and working well, and then introduce changing how you decide which problems to solve.
Yeah. No, fully agree. It makes absolute sense. Now, you mentioned that you're generalizing and that depending on the context, right, size of the organization and legacy in the organization, this might look differently. Now, I mentioned earlier, I would like to look at two different cases, not specific case studies of yours, but hypothetical organizations so that many of our clients, but also other organizations can relate to that. Let's start with smaller companies that are around 1,000 people. They're still large, but smaller than the giant companies. Maybe have 2, 3, 4 products that they're working on. Hopefully, most of the products they're actually building themselves. So they're not reliant on SAP or whoever and just customizing their solutions. They really own those products, the release frequency, everything. How would you approach a transformation towards the product operating model in those organizations? Would you start with one product area as a pilot? You mentioned in the book the importance of doing pilots. Would you do all of it at the same time? Based on what kind of condition would you make that decision? And then what would your steps look like?
Well, the first step, I would argue, is the same really independent of the size of the organization, because the first step is what really informs the rest. And that first step is an assessment. You have to figure out where they really are. So, for example, in the assessment, you might find out that in this 1,000 person company, there's really 3 business units and 2 of them were acquisitions. And so they really are completely different tech stacks, completely different legacy. And then on one of them is sort of their original. And so, all right, well, what's their business strategy? What are they going to do here? This kind of assessment will tell us where to focus our attention, both what's most important, but also what do we have to work with? So we were just talking about delivery. We might find that one of those 3 is already doing continuous delivery. They have the infrastructure in place. They were a modern team when they were acquired. The other 2, way behind. So all of these factors, and just as an aside, we shared our own assessment in the book. So, you can start with that, you can change it, but we just shared our assessment. We do that ourselves. Now, normally that assessment is designed to be done on a business unit basis. So that's usually 1 or more products, but it's not all like in a very large company, a 10,000 person company, that's going to be many business units. So the assessment is normally done on a business unit basis. And in a small company, they're the same, right? The company is the business unit. But in a medium company, you often have at least a few of these. In a large company, you have many of these. So we suggest starting with that assessment, and then based on the assessment, select a strategy, a transformation strategy. So for example, pilot teams. And there are many flavors of pilot teams. You might do one pilot team for the delivery work, another pilot team for the discovery work. So you can do lots of flavors of this, but pilot teams are a really effective way for the organization to adopt change. It's based on the reality that people are people, and some love change, some hate change. Most are in the middle somewhere. They don't want to be the first, but they want to see how it works and let themselves sort of digest this idea first. So pilot teams embrace that reality. This is referred to as the technology adoption curve, but they embrace that. So we let early adopters opt in to that pilot team. We set them up to succeed everything we can, but most importantly, the organization is learning how well that works, and everybody can watch and everybody can see for themselves. Anyway, I'm oversimplifying again. There are many different things, you might, depending on what's, what you're trying to do. And, I should point out, if it's a small organization, when I mean by that, like I've gone into companies that are scale ups that the whole company, except for maybe sales, is in the room and it's less than 100 people. We can transform that organization in a week. I mean, it's not, if you can get them in a room, it is a lot easier. On the other hand, in your scenario, 1,000 person, it's probably 1 to 2 years. Now, that doesn't mean 1 to 2 years before there's any value. It just means 1 to 2 years before all the business units have done what they needed to do. And if it's a large company, it's more like 2 to 3 years for that, because you're going to do multiple business units in sequence.
Yeah, or even more. But going back to the topic of pilot teams, I always say to my clients, it is very important to build an internal case study.
Right.
Because we can look at all the Silicon Valley companies, we can look at all the companies that you've mentioned here in your book. It's all great, but there's still this thing from people that are resistant to change. Yeah, but it doesn't work with us. But the moment you show them that it works within their organization, with the constraints they have, be it the legal environment, be it the people, be it the legacy culture, whatever, then you take that wind out of their sails of resistance. And actually you turn it into a wind that supports the transformation, because suddenly people say, oh, let's see, we can do it. And it brings this results. And going back to the 4 reasons you mentioned for changing, right? It takes away, it shows you that you can compete with people that you were fearing earlier. It shows you that you probably can get higher valuations if you're listed at the stock market. It shows you that you can get in better talent, right? So all of those things are suddenly in the realm of things that are possible. And showing people that things are possible, I think, is very, very important within their context. So I agree on that. Now, if we look at a real large company, thousands of people, 10,000 plus, would you still believe that this can be done in 2 to 3 years? I mean, this could become a very theoretical conversation. I'm aware of this. I just want to get your thoughts on this, because I'm currently working with several clients at that size. Or do you really think we should prep them for a way longer journey?
This really depends on, this is what's tricky about those very large businesses, because they're really multiple businesses.
Yes.
Really. And we don't know, first of all, who says they all even want to transform? It's very possible that some of them do and some of them don't. Each one has its own culture. Each one has their own leaders. And the truth is, it could range from, I'd be shocked if it could be done in less than a few years, but the upper end is infinite, right? If they don't really want to change, then it's not going to happen. So it really makes more sense to look at it on a business unit by business unit basis. And that is one of the things often, we haven't talked about this yet either, but I love to do, and so do my partners. You've talked to Christian. He's excellent at this. We love to do senior executive briefings where we sit with the senior leadership team, the C-suite, and we talk about transformation, what they need to understand about this, what they're really getting into. And this is one of the most basic questions. You need to decide which of your business units this is important for, which ones maybe it's not even worth the investment, because you're ramping those down. Maybe you're going to divest some of them. So this is a pretty big topic. But then, of course, what we're really looking for, what are the ones that you really believe need to happen now? Let's focus there. Let's get those wins. You may decide that right afterwards, you want to spread it to the next business units. You may decide it doesn't even need to happen there. You're good, because now your new future revenue sources are covered. Who knows? But you're right. It could take a long time. And a lot of the reason it can take a long time is because there are essentially multiple transformations.
Yes. So this is one of the things that definitely drives complexity, drives duration. And I agree. We shouldn't think of a one size fits all, even solution. in this case, right? And the product operating model is some kind of solution, although it's a conceptual model. Now, other constraints I'd be interested in that would be, from your perspective, things to watch out for before you decide to make a transformation. And I'll give you one example, and maybe you're like, oh, this is not even a constraint, and you come up with other things. But in the first case I mentioned, we have a company that is in full control of the products and services that they're building. What if parts of the products and services that an organization is developing is, for example, the customization of certain SAP solutions? So they're not in charge of the release cycle of SAP. And I don't want to put SAP in a bad light. It's just the first example that comes to my mind, right? Where you do could also be Salesforce, right? So you're not in charge of the release cycle.
There's 100 different vendor systems out there that are used. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But the surprising thing is what you just described, that's the case in every company.
Yes.
Every company. Now, it might not be SAP or Salesforce.com. It may be AWS. Everybody is building on components today, or it might be OpenAI. It might be, that's a great example where you're basically renting a service. Yeah, you're renting their service. You can't control necessarily everything that's happening in that infrastructure. So the point is, that's the normal case. What you are describing is not the edge case. It is the normal case. Mm-hmm. We always have some things that we are building and some things that we are leveraging. And sometimes, the product you're leveraging has an API that's nice and flexible. Stripe is an example of that. Shopify is an example of that. AWS is an example of that. Google Cloud. Okay. And other things, you have a little less capability. SAP is very configurable. Salesforce is very configurable. We might have our own people doing that customization, or we might actually use an agency that specializes in SAP customization. I don't know what the latest numbers are, but that's probably like a quarter of the revenue that Accenture gets is SAP customization. Personally, I think that makes sense, because what you want your engineers to do is what's special about your company. And customizing SAP, probably not what's special about your company. So what we want to do is make sure you have an amazing experience. Like, for example, I've always loved e-commerce companies since early days of Amazon. And eBay was not really an e-commerce company. It was a marketplace, but that was our real competitor. And it's a really interesting business. But in a typical e-commerce company, only about a quarter of the teams are customer facing. Most of the product teams are customer enabling or platform infrastructure. So this is all product. So Amazon is just an e-commerce company, right? Like 1,000 others. Yet Amazon they probably have more influence to the product model than anybody else. They understand how to leverage technology to better serve their customers. They're still selling the same, the same whatever that everybody else is selling. The difference is how they power their business, how they serve their customers. That includes how they handle shipping, how they handle their warehouses, how they handle pricing, all of this. They understand how to leverage technology to serve their customers. It's not about the vendors, and Amazon has tons of vendors. They build a lot of the stuff themselves, but they also buy a lot of stuff from others, rent a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it, because as you were saying, right, AWS, OpenAI, Stripe, we're all building on things that we cannot control, but we live with that constraint and focus on what is it that we can control. Now, if we look at teams that are doing the customization of SAP, etc., no matter whether they're internal or external, and I get into this topic of external or outsourced engineers as well, but would you even run the product operating model in those contexts? Or would you say, this is not, I'm not going to say limitations of the model, but this is not like the place where we would apply it.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair. I get that question. It's an interesting one too, because you could certainly use the product model.
Yes.
I mean, I do say, here's where the line is. If you don't have any developers working on it, then no, the product model is not for you. In other words, let's say you use SAP, but you don't have any developers. You're just using SAP out of the box. Having developers, if you don't have any developers, that's not what the product model is for. At that point, it's just like you're using whatever other teams are using it. There's no need for the product model. But if you have developers building something, that's where you can use the product model. Now you have to ask the question, should you be having those engineers build this? If it's a commodity thing, that's when I send people to Accenture. It's like they do this every day for thousands of companies. Why would why do you need a product manager? Why do you need a designer? Why do you need engineers? You don't. Just hire them to do what you need to do for your, accounting requirements there, and you're good. And instead, use your people and use the product model on what distinguishes you, your competencies, the experience you provide to your customers. For example, I mean, we were talking about e-commerce. I mean, Amazon invested in their loyalty program very, very heavily. It was one of the most successful returns in technology in history. Because they that was like special. They could do that and say, okay, that's Amazon. We're still shipping the same book. You can buy my books on Amazon or any other retailer. So what's different is the experience Amazon provides you. And that can include things like loyalty programs. It can include things like expedited shipping options and stuff. And so that's where you want to focus your engineers. Do you really need to use your engineers for something that Accenture does the same way all over the place, in the world? Probably not.
No, I fully agree. Now, let's say you're doing something that actually distinguishes you from the competition. And I want to get to this topic of outsourced versus insourced, internal people. Because there is a section in the book, if I remember correctly, where you have some thoughts around that topic. And I would like to get that on tape. No, just joking. But
no, I've been on record on that for many years.
I know. Now, what is your perspective? Can companies that outsource even get the benefits of the product operating model?
No, I don't think they can. Now, remember, the caveat is what you just brought up. Are we talking about teams where it's appropriate, the product model? If you're working on something like, let's say, your e-commerce company's loyalty program, let's say you don't get that off the shelf. That is something that you have decided to really invest in. Then if you are outsourcing your engineers, you are dramatically reducing any chances of innovation. By the way, you're also going to go way slower and it's going to cost more. That's the irony. People think they're going to save money, but they don't. And we can go into the reasons why. But I have been using this sort of half joke, that a product model company would no sooner outsource their CEO than they would outsource their engineers.
Yes. I remember that from the book. And I mean, the reason people think it's cheaper is because the individual unit is cheaper.
That's right.
The total cost, right? You always have to look at the total cost.
No, you do. And if you look at time or cost to outcome.
Money. Yes.
That's right. Because that's where a smaller organization working with your own people will run circles around outsourced organizations.
Yes.
And a lot of this, the whole product model, one of the ways this is described, another way it's described is mercenaries versus missionaries. Yeah, and of course, outsourced engineers are very literally mercenaries.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's one of the, I think you mentioned like one of the principles in there. Now, first step, assessment. Let's say we decide we want to do this, so the model is something that would help us advance. And we decide we want to do it within a unit, and within a unit, maybe on a product. Let's say this is our pilot. What's the second step? What do we do?
Well, yeah, and all of the subsequent steps will be informed by the assessment. So the assessment will tell us, right? They will tell us, like, maybe there's an infinite number of hypotheticals here. If we find that the issues are, they can't release, they're releasing quarterly. Oh my gosh, you can't run a business today when you're releasing. It's crazy. So, not one that takes care of your customers. So maybe that's the big thing we need to focus on first. Maybe on the other hand, the assessment shows they're actually very reasonable. Let's say they're not great, but they're releasing twice a week and consistently, each team. Then I'd say, well, pick your battles. That's fine. It can be approved later. Let's go tackle the next big issue. Maybe that's product discovery. Let's introduce those skills. So everything depends on what that assessment tells us. And of course, those are just two of any number of things you might encounter. One of the reasons we wanted to share so many case studies is to talk about the sort of the range of things you could run into. You probably, I can imagine with your medical background, reading the Kaiser Permanente story about, and honestly, I'll tell you the truth, Sohrab, I didn't work with them. My partner, Chris Jones, did. But when Chris told me they did this, I was skeptical. I was like, oh my gosh, a regulated industry doing both healthcare and insurance. And they were able to, in the US, every state has its own licensing. It is a very complicated problem. And in a few months, they did a remarkable solution that not only really helped a significant percentage of Americans, but also helped their own staff, their own care providers. So that the kind of challenges involved in a highly regulated environment like that versus, say, we were talking about the team in Saudi Arabia, which had a very different set of challenges. You never know the challenges, right? You have to sort of see what they are and make sure your organization is prepared.
Now, fully understand. I would like to dive into the role that people like you and I can play. Where do you see, initially, of course, we raised the awareness. You mentioned talking about or talking to senior executives. We basically, I don't want to say we sell it to them, because that's not what people like you and I do. That's what some of the other companies do out there. But we encourage them, if they face those challenges, that it is possible. And we show them what kind of effort it takes and investment it takes to get in there. But after that initial alignment, what is the role that people like you and I can play?
Yeah. Well,
especially
I think
given we're small companies, right? SVPG is small, my company is small, right?
Yes. So what are the things that we haven't talked about yet? It's kind of the big catch-22 about transformation, is that, yes, let's assume that one way or another, the leaders of the company have decided that they need to transform. They want to transform. They've made that choice. They still have a lot of questions, but they know they have to embark on this. One of the big challenges, the catch-22, is what do you do if you want to transform, but none of your leaders know how to transform? Right? This is such a common problem, because we've had leaders that have wanted to transform for decades, but it's very often that they struggle. Now, unfortunately, as we've talked about, sometimes they turn to agile coaches, but they don't know what the product model is. So they might help them with delivery, hopefully, if it's a good one, but they probably won't help them in any other dimension. Or they turn to, say, McKinsey or a Bain or a BCG. And the problem there is that they have never worked in the product model. So they do have the trust of the CEOs, which is a big advantage, but they don't have the knowledge. So hence most companies we find, they've already spent millions trying and failing to transform because they followed one of these other things. So this is a real problem. So what we recommend is there's two paths we see. And in the case studies, you'll find each of these. One path is the leaders need to bring in leaders that know what they're doing, right? They bring in experienced product leaders. That's what happened to Trainline, for example. The new investors brought in a CEO that had run product companies before, and that CEO brought in a head of product and a head of technology. And those three led the transformation. Personally, they did it. And that is one model. The other model is the leaders say, we have good leaders, they just don't have this experience. And we believe that we need to help them get this experience. And that's where product leadership coaches play a big role, product coaches in general. So you may have engineering leaders that are hopefully good, but maybe they've never set up continuous deployment themselves. So they need the help of a real delivery coach. Or maybe you have a product or design leader that has never done product discovery, like a lot of them. So they bring in a discovery coach. Or maybe you have a product leader that has never done product strategy. So you bring in a product leadership coach. So I think the answer for most companies is coaching. Product leadership coaching. It's not a long-term thing. It's for usually a few months at a time for some specific things like helping on product strategy, helping on team topology, helping to coach your people on the skills they need. And so a large chunk of the book is describing to the readers what to look for in a good product coach. Because we don't want them making the same mistakes they made with Agile coaches or with MBA, management consultancies. Yeah.
Yes.
So we want them to find people that have been there, done that. And in fact, in the book, it shares 7 profiles of real coaches that are, and that was intentional. It's so that somebody can read it and say, all right, now I understand why they recommend people like this. Yeah, because they've been there, done that. So I think that's how we can all help. And I am always trying to build that network out. We like you said, we're very small. So, and we usually work with the senior leadership team and then we recommend in coaches, but we don't have any financial tie with any of these coaches. We don't want any financial ties. We just want to be able to say, this person knows what they're doing. They can help you to do this.
Yeah, I think that's very important. So when I bring in other people to support my clients, I also always emphasize on the fact I'm not going to make a margin on that. There's no kickback, nothing, because I don't want them to even think that there might be a conflict of interest. Right. I recommend someone because I believe that person's good and that person can help my client advance. And if then I get the credibility for that, that's all that I need, right? Because everything else will then fall into place. Now, Marty, given the time, it's been an hour, a bit over that. I think it's very important for people like me and many other coaches that are out there to see that, and this is also the art of the possible, right? You not only show with this book to organizations that change can happen, you also show to people like us that we can transform large organizations. If we have the right message in place, if we build our own competencies, you distinguish between various types of coaches. And I look at my own journey. I've done product, I've done process, I've done the leadership piece. And now I'm working more and more on transformations. And I'm not going to say I'm great at all of them, but I know that I need to build these capabilities to be able to then help our clients. Because if I haven't done the job myself, how can I help them, right? But the book gives me a lot of encouragement that even a small company can be out there and have that impact on making small and large organizations make the leap towards the product operating model. And I wanted to personally thank you for that on the record, because I not always get the chance to speak to you, but more often than probably many others. And with that said, I hope to get to speak to you again soon. Even before you write a new book. So you don't have to write a new book for me to invite you. And thank you so much.
Well, thanks for inviting me back, Sohrab. I enjoyed the conversation. Hope it's useful to people.
Yeah, it will. It will definitely. All right. Bye, everyone.